I'll touch on the issue of mass migration of healthcare workers because talking about all of this training and healthcare facilities and perception in healthcare, we need workforce, and it's depleting in Nigeria because all our fantastic and wonderful doctors are all finding greener pastures in the Western world. So what can we say to this, Mr. O'Connell?
I say that we can't really blame them, unfortunately. We have to recognize that people in general, human beings, will seek for the best outcomes for themselves. And that is not a bad thing. As human beings, that's what we are designed to do. Now, what is then the onus then lies on the politicians, the policymakers to create that enabling environment for them to train and retain their workers and ensure that those workers are in a safe space where they feel valued, where they feel important enough to work and be appreciated and rewarded for their labor. Have to create a society where you attract people. So you can expect where you have non-functional health facilities, you don't pay your workers, you owe them salary months on end. And when you do pay them, the salaries is not adequate to live a decent, dignified life. And you expect them to stay in that environment. That is not a practical and realistic for anybody, especially people who are highly skilled and their skills are in demand across the globe. Has made it such that people are able to transfer their knowledge, transfer their skill, and people will take their skill to the place where they feel they will be most rewarded for it, and they'll feel more comfortable and safe and appreciated. So it comes back to the governments, the politicians, the policymakers to create that environment.
What I will just add to that is, how much can we rely on our governments to do the right thing? Particularly when we think about a history of colonization and the issues and the disparities and inequities. So for them to actually have the capacity to build an environment that people are going to want to stay in and work in, that capacity is in question because there is a lot of Western influence within Africa that hinders some of the progress. And what I will say is, in terms of, and I was watching a documentary, I think it was on the BBC, called The Brain Drain. And what I feel like is, while our governments should have a degree of responsibility, I feel like the Western governments also have responsibility for ethical practice. And I think it's unethical to take thousands of people from very struggling countries, take their expertise, you take their brain, you take those things, and you plug it into your economy and into your system. What does that say about the country that's been left behind? Are they ever going to be able to make it? Is it sustainable? Are they going to be in a perpetual state of disadvantage as a result? So I think there needs to be ethical considerations, and there needs to be barriers in place and parameters set out to ensure that these countries are not continually taken advantage, because it just looks like another modern day kind of, in a sense, where you're bringing people to your country to build your economy. The similar sort of thing. It's a similar sort of mindset. And if you're going to really have a chance, I think, yes, the government needs to make changes, but I think the Western world needs to also put some ethical parameters in place and perhaps not create systems that mean that training the expertise from these developing countries, but actually put some system in place to help developing countries get on their feet. I think it's two ways. It's a difficult one. I think there's a lot of ethical considerations there.
I think you just took the words from my mouth, Jennifer. Exactly what I was thinking. O'Connor, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I hate to sort of disagree with two ladies on the subject of that, but I do slightly disagree. I think I get where you're coming from, for both of you. I get where you're saying there is an ethical or moral point of that, but governance is not an ethical or moral issue. The national interest of any country is not a moral or ethical issue. It is a selfish interest. These Western countries are concerned about their own citizens. The countries of the developing countries should be more concerned for their citizens. to the point that they create that environment for their citizens to want to stay. And what's so difficult about making Africa and the developing countries the place where Western want to come? Why can't we attract them from the West? Why is that not a possibility? So I think we shouldn't absolve our leaders of that responsibility to look after their own. What does it say when African leaders leave their own country and seek medical help abroad? They're the ones who go abroad to seek medical help. When they're sick, they don't have hospitals in their own country that treats them adequately, and they run abroad. So what message are they sending to their own doctors, to their own health systems? So we cannot absolve them of that responsibility. It's their duty. They aspire for office. They get into power. They have the resources of the collective wealth of their countries. They should use it to invest in their people, train up enough people. In a country like Nigeria, for example, the official figure puts unemployment at about 35%. Unemployment in a country that's full of young people. Why are these young people not in schools, not in training, not in jobs, not being recruited? So it's not a question of somebody's taking capacity. And in fact, it was even a minister of labor who once boasted that they are fine with losing their doctors and losing their nurses, that they have enough. They said so. Far from being exploited, they boast that they can afford to lose those doctors. So I put the responsibility squarely where I think it belongs. And it is for people in government to take the responsibility and fix their systems, create the culture, create the infrastructure, create the resources to protect our women and the future generations. So it's not just about, and I
think we've
have
lost
to
you.
recognize it's not just about protecting women here. It's about protecting the future generations to the next
Generation. Yeah.
I wanted to just
Hello,
respond
am I
to some
there?
of what you were saying. Yeah, we can hear you. It looks like you were dropping off a little bit
Sure.
there.
Yes, we can hear you
Yeah,
now,
cool.
Mr. Kune.
Yeah, I was going to just respond to what you were
that's
saying.
my point.
The joint's responsibility. The reason for that is because we cannot underplay the impact of history and Western influence in Africa. We just cannot underplay it. And I think, sadly, a lot of people are unaware of the historical significance of events that have created a situation where Africans are unable to stabilize themselves or support themselves. So I think that cannot be underplayed. I think we're attributing too much power to our government, because even though they're in charge, psychologically, mentally, economically, they're really not in charge. I think it's understanding the Western interference and how that has impacted on the psychology of the African man or the African woman or the African leader. And I think that can't be underplayed. I think it's really important to understand that. And in terms of just looking at changes that can be made, I think we need partnership. We can't do it on our own. We need partnership.
I do agree. I think, yes, the global community certainly needs to support developing countries. And when we talk about the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, there's a focus and there's a responsibility for developed countries to support developing countries. I don't doubt that for a second, and I get that. And of course, also the point you made about the historical context of the influence of colonialism, enslavement, and so on and so forth. I get that. But I do stress, and I think it's important to always make this point. There is no Western government that is stopping the president of any country from building hospitals in their country and not running away to the West. There's no Western country that is stopping the tools in their own country, giving opportunity for them to train their nurses, their doctors, equipping their... So when they fail to do that, and they have failed to do that, I think we have to put the responsibility on them. I will just take a message that was used during a drug abuse campaign in the United States a long time ago. when the West comes to those African countries to try and corrupt them and divide them and rule them and subjugate them and get them to steal their resources, they should use this phrase: just say no. No.
If only it was that easy.
Just say no. For watching our Mother's Health podcast today. Remember, every mother deserves safe birth. Bye-bye.